Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Jack Dean, who publishes a website called PensionTsunami.com. Jack, real pleasure to have you.
It's great to be here.
So what is Pension Tsunami?
Well, Pension Tsunami is basically what's referred to in the website industry as a news aggregator. And what I do is every day I use several search engines, and I get referrals, of course, from other people and reporters about what's happening mainly on the public employee pension front. We also take a look at what's going on in the private sector, sometimes foreign countries as well, because there are always interesting things happening, in Spain or France. But for the most part, we're trying to keep track of what's going on in the United States on the public pension issue, and our special focus really is on California.
All right. So on the site, you refer to something called multiple pension crises. What are the crises you're really referring to?
Well, the situation, if people are familiar with public pensions, to try and boil it down sometimes gets hard because there are so many different parts to the puzzle. But to keep it simple, in most states, in most municipalities, politicians have promised way too much to public employees in the future. In many cases, they haven't put enough away for the future. And what we're seeing now, of course, with a combination of factors, is a looming crisis whereby the population is aging, the amount that is owed has grown, and then, of course, to kind of top it all off, in 2008 we had the financial, the stock market crash here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the unions like to point to that as being the reason why we have this problem. But I really started monitoring this back in 2004 when I realized what was going on, and the fact that the promises that were being made would be very difficult to keep and very expensive if we do. And the taxpayers, of course, are on the hook in most cases, in most states and municipalities, for the amounts of money that are owed, either under their constitution or some other arrangement that means that taxpayers could end up being really hit hard down the road here. And that's where the tsunami issue or usage of the terminology comes in, because it's the kind of thing that is very much like a tsunami where people may not see it coming, but when it hits them, it's going to be pretty hard.
So were these problems existing before 2007, 2008, but just in a little way, or was it really, did it really start after the crash?
No, they were there before that, and I think a good example would be California, which of course is the state that I'm most familiar with, which is where I live, and am familiar with on a personal level, even in my own municipality here, my own city. In 1999, legislation was passed that allowed. It started at the state level, allowing the California Highway Patrol to increase their pension formulas. And, of course, when you increase a formula from 2% to 3% as a multiplier, it doesn't sound like much to the public.
It's a 50% increase.
But it is. That's right, exactly. In fact, I even had a dispute with a reporter in Sacramento in the early days about a story he did in which he reported it as a 1% increase in the pension. I said, no, it's an increase of 1% in the formula, but it's a 50% pension increase. And he didn't get it, because wow. At that point anyway, most reporters really weren't focusing on this and didn't grasp the big issue. So as time has gone by, that really has been the focus of PensionTsunami.com, has been on the media to not just to put links to the articles that are published, but also to make sure that I get all of the reporters and the editors and the columnists to be aware of what everybody else is doing and experiencing, and making them aware that they're all going through the same kind of thing at their level. But with a 50% increase in the pension formula, it, of course, with nothing being put aside to cover all of the people who are in the system already, that created an instant, huge unfunded liability. And then after 9/11 in 2001, firemen and policemen became instant heroes to everybody, and they got pretty much whatever they wanted at the local level throughout not just California, but throughout the country. So at least in California, it was a 50% increase for most of those folks, the public safety people. And you kind of see how this has continued to build. I mean, it's sort of like instant unfunded liabilities were being created on a constant basis. And unfortunately, I don't know if my grandchildren live in Texas. I don't know if they'll ever be able to afford to come back to California.
It depends, I guess, what the situation is also in each of the states. It seems that
many
of the states
true.
have a problem. We're talking to Jack Dean, who has a website called PensionTsunami.com, which for those of you who don't know how to spell tsunami, that's okay. Just go to Goldstein on Gelt.com, and we'll put a link to the site on the show notes for today's show. Jack's been talking to us about some of the problems that we've seen specifically in California, but in many places where the promises to state workers are perhaps much more generous than the states can really afford. So, Jack, I know a lot of people are familiar with the answer to this, but why can't these states ultimately declare bankruptcy? Isn't that where they're going to go anyway?
Well, I was going to say that at the state level, there is no true bankruptcy option. At the local level, more municipalities are starting to pursue it. And in California, of course, we had Vallejo, and then we had Stockton, and now we have. If people look on the website today, they'll see, and yesterday they'll see some, some follow-ups on the story about San Bernardino, which is filed for bankruptcy, and the judge is going to rule whether they can actually do that or not. Then, of course, in other areas, you look at Detroit, which, of course, is a huge one, and of their $18.5 billion in debt, about half of it is due to pensions and health care promises that were made. So they're still sort of in limbo. Prior to that, Central Falls, Rhode Island declared bankruptcy.
Tell me what happened in some of these cases when they declared bankruptcy, some of them that you're listing. What was the end result?
Well, I was going to say the ones in California, Vallejo, they didn't touch pensions. This, of course, is always is a big issue because in California, supposedly under the Constitution, those are basically off limits; they're untouchable. However, the bankruptcy judge at that point, when Vallejo was in bankruptcy, said that he would consider some modifications to those pensions, but the city council lacked the fortitude to go there, and they never did. And unfortunately, Vallejo, a couple of years later now, after coming out of bankruptcy, is looking at possibly having to file again. So if they really don't deal with that as one of the key issues, then they haven't solved the systemic problem that they've gotten themselves into.
Well, how long is this going to go? In other words, the politicians are constantly kicking the can down the street because they don't want to deal with it on their watch. So at what point will this become just impossible?
Well, that's hard to tell, and that's where the tsunami concept comes in here. Well, following up on the can analogy, I have frequently said that if I were to do perhaps more of a video version of that particular analogy, a cartoon, I would have someone kicking a can down the road, and each time they kick it down the road, the can gets bigger and bigger, and at some point, of course, the can gets so huge that you really can't move it anymore. And that's kind of what's happening in California, for example, with the CalPERS, which is the biggest public pension fund in the country. If not, well, I think Japan may be bigger, on the world level, but it's huge, and it handles most of the municipalities in the state of California. And what they've had to do is begin passing along the increased costs to the employers, meaning my city, for example, will be experiencing a 50% increase in the amount they have to contribute for all of their employees over the next 3 years. So what's happening in all of these places is they're discovering that more and more money is going to cover retired employees, which is money, of course, that can't be used to fill potholes or to put new grass on the Little League field or something along those lines. So city services, the things that people really want out of their taxes, are being really squeezed.
So is there any possibility that someone's going to actually wake up who can make a decision and say, either we have to stop what we're doing, but that's of course very difficult because these people who are getting the pensions, if they're in their 70s or 80s, they don't necessarily have any other savings, so you can't bankrupt them. But at least to say every public service worker who is below the age of 30 or 40 is going to lose his pension benefits, or they will be drastically cut, and you got to start saving like every other working guy.
Well, in California, we're working on that, and in most other states, folks are working on it too. Like in Illinois, for example, there's a number of organizations that are trying to work with the legislature. Illinois created their own problem because they weren't putting enough money away. They were using it for other stuff at the state level. So there, as I say, there are a whole different. There's a whole bunch of different moving parts to this. Rhode Island is Central Falls, Rhode Island is an interesting example in that they appointed a receiver. They have that option under their law, who talked to the folks who were getting pensions and tried to work with them, especially to see if they could maybe set something up whereby people who were getting larger pensions would, take a bigger cut. And nobody wanted to work with him, and in the end, he basically just slashed the pensions by 50%. Everybody got half of what they were expecting. Right. There are options like that which are rather draconian. What we're trying to do with the reform movement is figure out a way to do what they do in the private sector, whereby, for example, my brother-in-law worked for a huge corporation in Delaware that said, this isn't penciling out for the future. People are living too long. We can't afford to support them until they're 100. So what they do is they say, okay, we're going to pay you everything that's vested, that you're owed up until next July 1st, and from then on you're going to be in a defined contribution plan, which effectively stops the bleeding.
So you're saying that's for the workers. That's not for people who are already retired.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
The people who are already on pensions ideally should be able to, and they should get what they were promised. I mean, to be fair about it. But again, Pritchard, Alabama is top of the news today. It's one of the canary in the coal mine in 2009 that declared bankruptcy. It's a small town. And they just stopped getting checks in the mail. And when they called to find out why, they were told there was no more money in the pension fund. I mean, as you can see, there are so many variables here that it's difficult to predict what's going to happen and where it's going to happen. But it definitely makes it interesting monitoring what's going on.
Well, you are quite a monitor, and that comment you made is maybe what many of us will hear from the Social Security Administration in not too long. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to discuss that on today's show because we're just about out of time. Jack, in the last few seconds, just tell me, how can people follow your work?
Well, just visit pensiontsunami.com, and you'll find links there that to everything you could imagine about about pensions.
All right, Jack Dean of Pension Tsunami, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.